Asclepions were healing sanctuaries constructed in ancient Greece dedicated to Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. Within these sacred temples, patients would engage in mystic rituals, hoping to receive medical advice from the divine physician Asclepius himself. In Homer's Iliad, Asclepius was just a man, a physician who would tend to the wounded soldiers at Troy. But by Hippocrates' time, he had become a worshipped god, and to this day still has influence in science, architecture, and religion. It's well known in Greek mythology that polytheism and the worship of goddesses and gods was the center point of the religion, but Asclepius did not originally start out as a Greek god. He was considered a demigod. Apollo was his father and was the Greek god of healing, truth, and prophecy. He had impregnated a mortal woman, Coronis. During her pregnancy, Coronis actually married another mortal man, angering Apollo, who killed them both in a rage. But while Coronis' body burned on the funeral pyre, Apollo cut her stomach open, performing the first cesarean section. This would free Asclepius from both the womb and from death, so Asclepius' very birth would come from a heroic act of medical intervention. Asclepius translates into meaning to cut open. Asclepius was then raised by a wise centaur who taught him the art of medicine. Asclepius would surpass these teachings, though, and quickly gain recognition for his mastery within the medical field. For this, the goddess Athena would gift Asclepius with Medusa's blood. It's said that the blood from the veins on the left side of Medusa's head would be the bane of all mankind. But Asclepius would use the blood from the right side of her veins to help save mankind, and even was able to use it to raise the dead, which would eventually be his undoing. Because when Zeus, the king of gods, began seeing his old enemies walking again after being brought back to life by Asclepius, it angered him greatly. He feared that this act would eventually make all men immortal and was scared of the negative consequences that could possibly happen if this kind of great power were to fall into the wrong hands. So in a rage, he killed Asclepius with one of his legendary thunderbolts. This was the beginning of Asclepius' transformation incarnation from demigod to god. Once word spread throughout Greece of Asclepius' death, his followers would begin building these temples in dedication to him, and they were the original Asclepions. These temples were built in settings of awe-inspiring natural beauty and scenic grandeur throughout Greece. They contained features of a sacred space, they were on sacred ground, and they were built for the purpose of healing, dedication, and were seen as an opening to having an out-of-body contact with the divine. These Asclepions dedicated to the god of medicine were built to be spiritual healing sanctuaries and were centered around dream therapy. Within these centers, a patient seeking medical cures believed that sleeping within one allowed Asclepius to contact them directly in a dream form. Asclepius had learned the nature of drugs and herbs through treating diseases and would actually pass this knowledge along to his students through the use of divination and also to physician priests who would speak for Asclepius, and they would work within the Asclepions. But before the ritual healing could begin, there was a preliminary admittance treatment to an Asclepion. The first part of this was the catharsis, or purification. It consisted of a series of cleansing baths and purging, accompanied by a cleansing diet, and it would last for several days. But once the catharsis ended, and there was usually an offering of gold, silver, even a marble structure of the body part that was wanting to be healed, the rites could begin. The physician priests would invoke suggestive prayer and to tell the patient stories of accounts of past cures, putting them into a positive and receptive state of mind. Finally, the patient would spend the night in the holiest part of the Asclepion, the abaton, which served as a dream incubation chamber. Around them crawled non-poisonous snakes, honoring Asclepius, who was attributed with a serpent. And it was believed that Asclepius, bearing the rod entwined with a single serpent, would enter the dreams or visions of the patients during their sleep within the Asclepions and heal them directly or give them a treatment or cure for their ailment. If Asclepius himself didn't appear, then the physician priest could interpret the dream for the divine and prescribe treatment, the proper treatment. This sort of animism for a religious experience was the primary function of the Asclepions. The ancient Asclepions were the concept from which the healing retreat or sanctuary that people go to in present day to seek nature's cure had originally come from. However, there are many more religious elements involved that would come from it. In modern medical society, Hippocrates was known as the father of Western medicine, and the oath that new patients swear to uphold their medical and ethical standards by is called the Hippocratic Oath. Hippocrates was a Greek medical practitioner who Plato would call the Asclepiad at some point. So it's widely suspected that Hippocrates began his work within medicine in an Asclepian. It's also said that his father had been one of those priest-physicians himself. Except Hippocrates had turned away from the mythical and animism rituals practiced within the Asclepians and would favor the more rational, scientific part of the medical study. The original Hippocratic Oath actually began with the lines, "I swear by Apollo, the physician, and by Asclepius, and by Hygienia, and by Piscina, and by all the gods." So this reciting of the divine family tree was actually eventually dropped due to its mythical ties within a scientific community. However, the rod of Asclepius, often confused with Hermes caduceus, still remains prevalent as a symbol of medicine today. The serpent and rod symbol is used by both the World Health Organization and emergency services. The forgotten function in all of this could be seen as both psychological and ideological, for religious and social reasons. The medical field has paid tribute to the mythical god of medicine when it's actually human doctors that have created these advances in medicine. It's a social rite of passage to recite the Hippocratic Oath. This personification of the miracle-working physician of elite medical skill is an archetype invoked today by many patients who place powerful religious faith in doctors and pray for a religious miracle, much like those patients who had sought medical treatment in an Asclepian had done centuries before. The rod of Asclepius, the symbolism of it is ironic because within the myth, even the most skilled physician could not hold off death. Asclepius' death by Zeus depicts the powerlessness of man against the natural order or forces of decay, death, and destruction. Within the centers for mystical healing rituals, modern and rational medicine would find its roots. It's said that Zeus later brought Asclepius back to Mount Olympus under the rule that the god of medicine would never again be allowed to resurrect the dead, which is probably the most ironic out of all of this because today it is a physician's primary goal to keep a patient from death, and many of them would say if they could bring somebody back from the dead, they would. They do try their hardest. So Asclepians were the almost original hospital, and we can thank Asclepius for that.